Hi folks, welcome. This is Suchinth Kumar at the IS Squared Studios. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of IS Squared, and today we're going to talk about a topic I'm really passionate about, IAM and the latest trends in IAM. And I'm super excited to have with me a special guest today, Neville Mendonca, who's been on the show before. Neville, as many of you know, is a thought leader in IAM, and super excited to have him. Before I kind of hand it over to Neville to get some initial thoughts to kick off the show, one of the things that I've seen with identity and access management is that there's a tremendous movement right now in the industry. There's a lot of talk for obvious reasons. I think the primary reason being the current threat landscape and the geopolitical stuff that's happening globally. And over the last few years, there's been a tremendous focus on identity management. That's one thing. Having said that, before we dive into kind of the latest trends and one, dare I say, even the hype, one thing that I always like to tell people is the foundations and the fundamentals remain the same. However, keeping those fundamentals and foundations in place, the way technology and technology companies are addressing this and helping their clients address this is changing very, very rapidly. Some of the major things impacting this change, I think, amongst many others, the primary changes are the increased focus on security, the focus on user experience, and cloud IAM. Now, there are other things that are also driving this change, but security, user experience, and cloud IAM are having a significant impact on the way we look at identity management, the way technology is moving, and also the way in which various companies have to attack this ever-increasing vast aspect of identity management. So with that, without further ado, I'd like to also, before we double-click, hand it over to Neville. Neville, first of all, welcome to the show, and any additional starting thoughts or initial kickoff thoughts that you had in mind, in addition to what I've just said?
Um, uh, Thank you for having me on this show again, Suchinth. It's always a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. I think you have covered it all. So the key over here is the fundamentals are mostly the same, but things keep evolving. So the IAM strategies they keep on changing based on the changing nature of IAM.
So Neville, I talked about three areas, right, which are primarily impacting kind of how the industry is moving and the latest trends in IAM. I believe, and it's not a comprehensive list, but you and I have talked before that security, user experience, and cloud. Another one I left out, and I think bears a mention here, is external identities. Now, consumer companies have always had to deal with external identities, but dealing with external identities for corporates that are more B2B have traditionally not had a significant consumer consumer-facing identity issues. They are getting more and more into kind of having a more elegant way of managing external identity. So that's another aspect. But coming back to kind of user experience, now with the pandemic accelerating the work from home or remote work or work from anywhere, as people are calling it, and we keep hearing passwordless authentication. So that's an aspect that I think we're seeing a lot of interest in, is user experience, work from anywhere. How do you balance security with concepts like passwordless? And also, I think we should talk about the very exciting announcement which we had. Apple, Google, and Microsoft have this kind of security pact where they're going to look at using devices and other methods to essentially do away with passwords. And I think that's very exciting. Obviously, we may see it take off more in the consumer space first, but I think it's also going to find its way into the enterprise very quickly. And it's really exciting, this announcement. It's also a bit surprising to many of the industry experts that Google, Apple, and Microsoft have joined together. I think it makes complete sense because between these three, they control a lot of the major sites, both the social media sites as well as a lot of corporate America. So I think something that they're doing, it's very exciting. But Neville, what are your thoughts on kind of user experience, passwordless, as well as this latest announcement from Google, Apple, and Microsoft? Back to you, Neville.
Okay, so Let's start with the remote worker. So in the last couple of years, we have seen more and more organizations letting their workers work remotely. So it's important that these workers are able to connect anywhere. So now the challenge is like from the organization's point of view is how do you distinguish between your real users connecting to your digital assets versus the malicious bots or the fraudsters. So smarter access control is required. So things like multi-factor authentication, risk-based access control, adaptive access controls, etc. However, just putting more and more access controls, uh, you also have to ensure that you have a good user experience as well. So this includes both your internal as well your external users, such as your external partners, your customers, your consumers, and so on. So more and more organizations are now thinking about moving towards passwordless access. And Suchinth, the thing that you talked about, the security pact between Apple, Google, and Microsoft. That's exactly what it is. Like the so the FIDO Alliance and the W2C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, they have come up with the standards for passwordless access. And uh, the big companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft, they're working together on implementing solutions around it.
Absolutely, Neville. And to add to that, what you just mentioned about the FIDO Alliance and this security pact between these three big tech companies, I just saw, I think, a statement, if I'm not mistaken, from Jane Easterly also talking about how, I think even, from the federal government perspective, everyone is thrilled about the innovation by the private sector here. So I think a lot of us are looking very excitedly, if I should say, on these developments on passwordless. And just a reminder for our viewers on passwordless, in some previous episodes, Nikolai, our Chief Security Officer, and myself have talked about passwordless, where there is not a magic bullet for passwordless. There's a lot of hype around it, but it's real, and it's really an approach and a strategy. And if done right, you can really achieve a higher level of a security posture and at the same time improve the user experience with that. So I think to conclude on the work from anywhere and the user experience, I still remember the days when I got a lot of pushback when we were doing multi-factor authentication, and there was the user group that was strongly pushing back against text messaging as the second factor of authentication. But 10 years later, I think it's considered pretty normal and in fact expected with MFA. So I think we're at a good spot where the technology is there, and I think if we can get these things to work together, I really like what we're talking about, things like the Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator app, and kind of being close to other devices and logging into a web browser that then gets to your phone to say, is this really you? I think if we can make that seamless, this holds some really good potential. So switching gears a little bit, coming back to the corporate world, some of our clients, actually a large number of our clients, have approached us over the last couple of years saying, hey, we've spent all these budgets and millions of dollars, especially in the large enterprises as well as in the mid-sized enterprises, on on-prem IAM, IGA, single sign-on over the years, and now suddenly we have this cloud IAM which has grown at a cloud usage which has grown at a rapid pace, for example in AWS, Azure, or GCP. And how do you handle cloud IAM? How do we leverage our existing IAM infrastructure and policies to the cloud? I think even for that the answer is very nuanced, but one thing to make it very, very clear is that cloud IAM is definitely, it's newer. It's a lot of the stuff on the cloud is cloud native, and has moved very rapidly. And because of the very dynamic nature of cloud, and organizations have become pretty mature in cloud usage right now, where development teams are able to spin up VPCs, for example, in rapid fashion as compared to several weeks requesting a server or a VM in the traditional world. We're seeing new challenges in IAM in the cloud, and quite frankly, there is not, if I could say very loosely, there is not a 1:1 correlation between IAM on-prem and IAM in the cloud. And what we suggest right now is that cloud IAM needs to be looked at, frankly, ground up, completely new, and over time see how this correlates with your strategy on the ground in on-prem. Now, having said that, the fundamentals don't change, but the tool sets, the way you approach the monitoring, the way you provision elevated access in the cloud, how do you monitor the growth of VPCs, the access, whether S3 buckets have been left open, a lot of that, those are complex problems, and there are tools and technologies that a lot of these cloud providers have made available, as well as third-party providers. But things like privileged access in the cloud, all of this stuff is really evolving. There's no magic bullet, but we've seen organizations, and we've helped several organizations have that roadmap on kind of building out a cloud IAM strategy. But Neville, I know you work much more deeper in cloud IAM. I just wanted to hand it over to you to maybe double click into cloud IAM and the various, I think, salient points that you think need to be looked at when you look at a cloud IAM strategy.
Yes. So definitely, Suchinth, cloud IAM is a vast space. Organizations are moving their digital assets to cloud, and these are decentralized multi-cloud environments that operate from hybrid IT environments. There is a surge in the number of machines and their usage. So there is a focus on access keys and certificates. Uh, More and more organizations are consuming SaaS-based services. So the API usage needs more scrutiny. There is also a need to integrate IGA, which is Identity Governance and Access, the PAM solutions, Privileged Access Management, and CIEM, which is Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. Uh, so the IGA functions are also evolving. Uh, Identity analytics to predict who has access to which resources, alert anonymous behavior, and thereby reducing the organization's risks are key.
So Neville, thanks for that. Like I said, I think I want to double click into, let's pick up API usage first as a topic. In recent years, especially with so many cloud native apps and so much interaction even in the cloud between so many different applications, some vertically integrated applications, as well as so much interaction intercompany between the company, the number of API calls, especially outside the network, has gone exponentially higher. And the focus on API usage, monitoring API usage, kind of going around the reviewing and monitoring the certification and recertification of whether certain API calls are still needed, understanding the access that each of those API calls is giving to sensitive data in certain cases, and who has that access through those API calls. That's something that has we have seen a lot of increased focus on, and companies are developing strategies on kind of how to architect them more elegantly from a security standpoint. So Neville, on this topic, since you dealt with a lot of integrations and API usage, and as it relates to IAM, can you expand a little more on this topic? Neville, over to you.
So Suchin, this is like critical, like the APIs. There are best practices around APIs. First of all, authentication and authorization. Who can access this API, and what all data can be accessed via this API. Then the other thing is validating all the requests that come and access this API. The other important factor is like encryption on the request as well as the responses. Um, then including only the necessary data in the responses. Don't include anything extra that is not really required. Then throttling of API requests. So establishing the quotas, logging the API activities, and then conducting security tests on the API. So these are some of the best practices that need to be followed when you deal with APIs.
Yeah, thanks, Neville. And those were great points. I think these are something that we're seeing in our architecture design that maybe in the past these were, in many cases, several years ago, these were afterthoughts, I think, from designing for security from ground up. Several of the points you mentioned, I'm seeing more and more in architecture. They've been discussed in the initial architecture diagrams and initial architecture discussions. So moving on from API usage and kind of coming back to cloud and CIEM, and we'll shortly talk about CIAM as well. I know there's a lot of jargon and acronyms here, but cloud infrastructure and entitlement management, that's a topic which has also gained a lot of traction with the rapid adoption of the cloud. And can you expand, Neville, on CIEM? Because I know in recent years, especially in the last couple of years, there's been a dramatic increase in focus on entitlements given to basically infrastructure items and digital assets that are placed in the cloud. So if you can expand on CIEM.
Yeah, yes, Suchin. So, like CIM or Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management, as organizations are moving their digital assets into the cloud in multi-cloud environments, access to these environments in these public clouds, it needs to be managed and it needs to be governed. So CIEM, it offers identity-centric solutions to manage the risks in the cloud. Um, so it's all about aggregating all the events, aggregating the audit data, aggregating the entitlements and assets in one place in a centralized location, and then using analytics, machine learning to detect this access anomalies or anomalies. Sorry. So these are like the excessive privileges that are given to users, the dormant accounts that exist out there. There are accounts with unnecessary access. So, and then finally, once you have this thing and all this data in one place, then CIEM provides you a way to remediate and enforce the least privileged access approach. So that's what CIEM is all about.
Thanks. Thanks, Neville. Really appreciate that. Now, moving on to the next acronym in this long list of acronyms is CIAM, which is Customer Identity and Access Management. Now, over the years, back in the day, I think a lot of the IAM was focused on internal infrastructure for large corporations, mid-sized corporations, a lot about internal onboarding, provisioning, entitlement and access management for internal users. Now, as we've seen B2B interaction as well as B2C, but for many of the enterprises, the B2B interaction and collaboration between companies, what we've seen is a growth in how companies want to look at usage of external identities, or rather the importance of external identities and the importance of getting visibility into the external identities. I know, Neville, yourself and myself, we've been in several discussions with customers, our own products, Orsys and EIG in particular, which deals with managing external identities. We've seen a lot of growth in interest in that product, especially for the use cases of managing customer identities. And what I mean by managing customer identities from a macro level is keeping it very elegant, managing them at an organizational level, the whole concept of having custodians to manage the certifications for customer identities. And again, customer identities, this could vary significantly between companies in the B2B scenarios. This could be distributorships, this could be clinical research organizations in the case of life sciences companies. This could be advertising agencies, legal agencies, all kinds of companies where there is a tremendous amount of interaction, but there's also a fluidity in the number of people from the external environment that need maybe very specific types of access. It could be to collaboration sites, it could be to very specific applications. So we've seen a dramatic increase in the interest for CIEM, and in particular, I would say at this point more of an awareness that there needs to be much better visibility. And with the current threat landscape, we're seeing EIG in particular, our product that focuses on external identity and access governance, get tremendous traction in this place. Anything from your end, Neville, to add on CIEM and what you've seen in terms of managing customer identities?
As you said, Suchinth, uh, now there is a lot of focus in the last few years on customer identities. Initially, it was like the internal workforce, what access they have within the organization. But now, like people are focusing, or organizations are focusing on customer identities, what access they have. Uh, uh, Especially due to data privacy and stuff like that. A lot of focus is around customer identities, and the tool that we have, EIG, it gives, it is a very sleek tool that can be used in the management of not just your external identities, which are your external partners or business partners, but also can be extended to manage your consumers, your customers, that you interact with.
Okay, thanks, Neville. And I think with that, we're going to shortly conclude this episode. I hope folks, appreciated some of the discussion, and we added some value here in understanding. Once again, to summarize, this field of IAM right now is evolving dramatically, especially with the events over the last couple of years, the work from home, the macro environment that we have, the tremendously increased threat landscape that we have. A lot of us are probably familiar with the term, the identity is the new perimeter. And so we've seen a lot of change and dynamic change in the identity and access space. I believe there's a lot of technological change that's happening. Some of the areas in IAM are converging. A lot of the established players are trying to get into other niche areas in IAM. And I think to just summarize where IAM is headed, the foundations have not changed. Authentication, for example, identity and access governance, provisioning, from the time a person joins the organization to the time they leave, privileged access management, as in protecting elevated access and elevated identities with elevated access. However, what is changing is the drivers of increased need for security, balancing user experience, keeping the user experience very seamless, and cloud IAM. And I think what these are doing is basically really upending the current thinking around IAM, where we need to go beyond the foundations, or rather build on the foundations that we talked about, and really consider user experience. I believe this latest security alliance or pact between Google, Microsoft, and Apple, and maybe there would be others that come along. These are probably going to lead some of the innovation over the next 12 to 24, 36 months. But from an IAM strategy for a corporation that's looking at it, what we would say is you've got to keep the foundations very much under consideration, but look at where the industry is moving in terms of passwordless. Keep your roadmap flexible. Look at these aspects of usability. And there's a tremendous amount of movement in terms of how cloud IAM is handled. So while there's no one magic bullet, you got to look at things like passwordless. You got to look at things like cloud IAM, and build an IAM strategy that's all encompassing and fits all of these things in addition to the standard foundations that may have already been built out. So once again, thanks, Neville, for joining the show today. It's always a great pleasure to talk with you, Neville, and I hope the audience, I hope all of you have found something useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us, and look forward to hearing from you, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode as well. Thanks.